Two patrol cars, all flashing blue and white, boxed in the sleek, custom Maybach, tires squealing on the faculty lot's cracked asphalt. Officer Throckmorton's face was inches from the tinted glass, his hand planted firmly on his hip. "This is restricted property, ma'am. Out." Now, the command was sharp and final, thick with immediate authority. Kehlani Dupree, the quiet CEO of Apex Technologies and the city's only black billionaire, held her calm, cool gaze. "Officer, I assure you, I'm not a trespasser. I'm Kehlani Dupree. I'm here to finalize a donation that will change this school," she explained, trying to inject the magnitude of the moment into his narrow focus. He scoffed to sound harsh. "Look, lady, I don't care if you're the Queen of England. You break the rules, you pay the price." Kay's lips curved slightly, her voice barely a whisper, yet deadly certain. "You just made a decision you and your superiors will profoundly regret." He yanked the door open, already reaching for her wrist, completely oblivious to the fact that he wasn't arresting a simple trespasser. He was taking down the very foundation of the city's financial elite. Before we dive into the betrayal that led to this arrest, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. By the end of this story, you'll witness the most satisfying billion-dollar revenge ever conceived. Kehlani Dupree, known to her family as Kay, was 32 years old, and the sheer weight of her existence felt heavy even before the squad car siren sliced the midday air. She was the founder and CEO of Apex Technologies, a quiet, unassuming giant in the educational software space, and by all accounts, the youngest and only black woman billionaire in the state. Today, though, she was just a black woman sitting in a sleek, black Maybach S-Class, legally parked, she thought, in a restricted area of the faculty lot at Lincoln High. She'd driven the car herself, wanting to feel the ground of her old neighborhood beneath her tires. Her assistant, Serafina, had begged her to take the armored Escalade, but Kay had waved her off, needing a moment of quiet reflection before her unprecedented donation. She was here to deliver an initial check and finalize the logistics $4/math, $200 new, state-of-the-art computers, and $8/math, $500, $000 scholarship fund for underprivileged students. A donation that would change the trajectory of this struggling, underfunded school. As the first police cruiser, then a second, sped toward her, tires spitting gravel, she checked her phone, noting she was 15 minutes early for her meeting with the school principal. Two officers, Officer Throckmorton and Officer Klein, emerged from their vehicles with a practiced aggression that instantly tightened the muscles in Kay's neck. They approached her car, hands hovering near their holsters. Officer Throckmorton, a tall man whose face was set in a permanent scowl, rapped sharply on her tinted window. She lowered it slowly, offering a small, polite smile. She was ready to explain everything, ready to show them the official school letter she carried, confirming her visit and her right to be there. But he didn't give her the chance. "Ma'am, you are parked in a restricted area. We need you to exit the vehicle and provide identification." He barked, his voice laced with an impatience that suggested he already knew the answer he wanted. Kay sighed, the smile fading as a familiar weariness settled over her. "Of course, officer. I'm actually here on official school business. I'm Kehlani Dupree, and I'm meeting with the principal in a moment to discuss a donation." She reached slowly toward the glove compartment, her movements deliberate and non-threatening, but Throckmorton's eyes narrowed further. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he commanded, his voice rising in volume, drawing the attention of two teachers who had just stepped out of the school building. The adrenaline began to pump, cold and sharp, as the situation escalated beyond a simple parking violation. Kay pulled her hands back and placed them firmly on the steering wheel. "Officer, I am not resisting. I'm simply trying to retrieve the paperwork that explains why I'm here. I have an official pass." Throckmorton's jaw clenched. He leaned in close, his shadow falling over her face. "You heard me. Step out of the car. Now." The air thickened with unspoken tension. Kay's composure, hard-won over years of fighting to be taken seriously, began to crack. She took a deep breath, knowing this was no longer about the car. "What is the reason for the demand, officer?" I have committed no crime, she asked, her voice steady but firm. Throckmorton's jaw clenched. He reached through the open window, fumbling for the door handle. Failure to comply. You're under arrest. His words were a sickening pronouncement that shattered the quiet of the sunny afternoon. He wrenched the door open, the sound echoing across the empty parking lot, and before Kay could even register the physical threat, his hand was grabbing her wrist, yanking her out of the luxurious vehicle and slamming her against the frame. The cold, unyielding steel of the handcuffs snapped shut on her wrists with a cruel finality. The shock of the metal biting into her skin was blinding, instantly overriding the sound of the teacher's gasping. Officer Throckmorton pushed her forward, his hand heavy on her shoulder, guiding her toward the open back door of the patrol car. The interior smelled of old coffee and stale vinyl, a cruel contrast to the leather scent of her own car. She felt a wave of icy humiliation wash over her as she was forced down onto the seat. Throckmorton leaned into the car, his face inches from hers. You can keep that $1 billion. It doesn't mean anything here. You follow orders. He didn't raise his voice, and that quiet malice felt worse than shouting. Kay, trying to steady her breathing, focused on the worn, chipped paint of the doorframe. I have not broken any law. I am a guest of the school district, she repeated, her voice low. The charges will be trespassing and resisting. The car started moving, pulling away from her Maybach, which now sat alone, looking impossibly foreign and exposed in the empty lot. As the precinct skyline came into view, the sheer absurdity of the situation hit her. This was the same neighborhood she had walked every day as a kid, carrying textbooks held together with duct tape. She remembered sitting on the old steps of Lincoln High, dreaming of a life where money wasn't a daily pressure, where her mother didn't work 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. That girl, the one in ragged sneakers, wouldn't have believed this future, nor would she have believed this betrayal. The memory was a dull ache against the sharp sting of the handcuffs. They pulled into the station lot. The back door opened, and Throckmorton gestured for her to get out. Before she could move, a third vehicle, a sleek, unmarked black SUV, screeched to a halt beside them. A man in an expensive suit, his face etched with authority, stepped out. This wasn't a patrol officer. This was power. His name was Chief Gideon Thorne, and he ignored the arresting officers completely, walking straight to Kay. Thorne's eyes, cold and assessing, locked onto her. He didn't introduce himself. Instead, he simply looked at Throckmorton and said, in a voice that brooked no argument, I want her in solitary. No phone, no media access. I'm handling this one personally. The chief's sudden, direct involvement meant this was no longer a simple arrest. It was a calculated, personalized takedown. Chief Thorne's chilling command hung in the air, transforming the precinct's routine noise into a deafening silence. Kay was escorted inside, the handcuffs biting deeper into her wrists with every step. The booking process was slow, deliberately humiliating. Her personal items, her expensive but simple jewelry, and even her phone were taken and bagged. As she stood against the wall for her mugshot, the fluorescent lights exposing every flicker of fear and fury, she felt utterly stripped of her identity. She was no longer Kelani Dupree, CEO. She was simply booking number at 4091, a statistic. Her mind drifted back to the innocent beginning of this nightmare, just 2 weeks ago. She decided the donation had to be anonymous at first, a surprise for the students. She had reached out to the one person she thought she could trust at Lincoln High, Brendan Hale, her childhood friend and current vice principal. Brendan had grown up 2 blocks from her, and they'd shared pizza and dreams of escaping their tough block. When they met at a quiet coffee shop to discuss the logistics, Brendan had been overly enthusiastic, almost manic. He'd told her he'd handle the paperwork and make sure her arrival was managed discreetly, citing his connections with the school board as his power. He insisted on coordinating the exact parking spot, claiming it was for maximum secrecy. "Okay, trust me," he'd said, flashing his perfect manufactured smile. "I'll make sure you're protected. This town loves to mess with successful people." Now, standing in the cramped holding cell, Kay replayed that meeting. The way he had pushed the specific parking spot. The way he had dismissed her suggestion of a formal public announcement. The reflection ended abruptly when a booking officer, talking to another staffer outside her cell, lowered his voice, but not quite enough. Yeah, apparently the VP called it in an hour before she even showed up. Said some suspicious, expensive vehicle was going to try and trespass. Said she was a nuisance. The words were like a physical blow. The vice principal, Brendan, her old friend. The realization was sickening. Brendan Hale didn't coordinate her security. He orchestrated her arrest. The gut punch of Brendan's betrayal was quickly replaced by a cold, searing rage. Kay was moved to a small, windowless interrogation room. Her first thought was to call Serafina, her assistant, who would mobilize an army of lawyers and crisis managers. Officer Klein came in, slid a cheap, heavy phone across the metal table, and watched her with an amused expression. "One call, sweetheart. Make it count. The chief says we listen in." Kay picked up the phone, her hands shaking slightly. She dialed Serafina's private number, but after 5 rings, it went to voicemail. She tried her estranged husband, Sterling, knowing he had powerful family connections, but his line was instantly busy. Panic began to claw at her throat. She tried 3 more numbers, each one failing to connect properly, ending in static or a busy signal. Klein chuckled, tapping his pen on the table. "Out of minutes, Billionaire. Maybe the cell signal doesn't like big money." This slow, intentional denial of contact was a psychological torture designed to break her composure. The memory of her original intention felt like a cruel joke now. She hadn't just wanted to donate computers. She wanted to give hope. She remembered being 16, staring at a broken monitor in the old Lincoln High lab, feeling the limit of her potential physically imposed by the outdated technology. That frustration had been the initial seed for Apex Technologies. She wanted to remove that technological barrier for the next generation. That pure, simple desire, to pay it forward, made the current humiliation feel exponentially worse. She took a final, desperate chance and dialed the office number of her lead corporate counsel, Zayden Cross. This time, the call connected. "Zayden, it's Kay. I'm at the precinct. I've been arrested. They won't tell me the charges." Zayden's voice, usually smooth and commanding, was laced with alarm. "Kay, I've been trying your phone for an hour. They shut down their landlines. Where are you?" She gave him the address and her location in the station. There was a pause on the line, and then a profound change in Zayden's tone. It became utterly cold. "Listen to me, Kay. Say nothing more. I will be there in 30 minutes. If any officer, including the chief, touches you, speaks to you, or denies you water, I will not only sue them for civil rights violations, but I will personally brief the federal district attorney on the misuse of government authority. Tell the officer listening that I'm calling the mayor's office and the ACLU right now, and I will have a judge sign a restraining order against Chief Gideon Thorne for targeted harassment." The phone was snatched out of her hand by Klein, who went pale as he listened to Zayden's voice booming from the receiver. He held the phone away from his ear, his previous smugness completely gone, replaced by sudden, genuine terror. Zayden's raw, legal threat hung in the silent room, finally giving Kay a sliver of hope and a powerful, immediate fear for the officers involved. Zayden Cross arrived 20 minutes later, his presence a dark storm front sweeping through the small precinct. He used his authority like a weapon, bypassing Chief Thorne's direct orders and demanding immediate release. However, the legal maneuverings took all night, and by morning, the police had successfully held her on the initial, vague trespassing and failure to comply charges, pushing for a rushed bail hearing. The moment Kay stepped out of the courthouse elevator, the scene exploded. Flashing lights and a wall of media reporters were screaming her name. This wasn't just a local news story. It was national controversy. The headlines painted her as the entitled tech queen who thought her money put her above the law. The immediate public condemnation online was furious. Users were claiming her Maybach blocked first responders and that she was using the school for a tax write-off. The narrative had completely divorced itself from the truth of her intentions. Zayden, a wall of bespoke wool, steered her through the chaos to the courtroom. The bail hearing was a performance. The prosecution argued that, due to her wealth and international connections, she was an extreme flight risk and demanded an astronomical bail amount. Kay sat still, her face a mask of weary composure, while Zayden systematically dismantled their arguments. Everything seemed to be going their way. The judge was clearly leaning towards setting a reasonable bail. Then, the judge asked if there was anyone from the community to speak on the character of Ms. Dupree. A collective hush fell over the courtroom. A woman stood up slowly from the gallery, a familiar face, older, dressed in a faded but neat floral dress. It was Dahlia Vance, a retired teacher Kay remembered fondly, a woman who had taught her grandmother. Dahlia approached the stand, her eyes wet with unshed tears, but her expression was stern, filled with deep-seated resentment. "Your Honor," Dahlia's voice trembled slightly, amplified by the microphone. "I've known Kalani since she was a girl. Her family, her good heart, it's all here." She paused, turning to look directly at Kay, the betrayal in her gaze slicing deeper than the handcuffs ever could. "But wealth changes people. She promised to help my nephew years ago, a promise that could have saved his career, and she broke it. She abandoned this community for the bright lights of Silicon Valley and only came back when she needed a tax deduction. I urge the court to consider the damage this kind of arrogance does." Dahlia's testimony was devastating, providing the necessary moral authority to the prosecution's case. Kay stared at the teacher, confusion warring with the fresh sting of public character assassination. What promise? What nephew? The judge immediately raised the bail amount tenfold, and Dahlia's betrayal, rooted in a mystery Kay didn't understand, became the new, cruelest weapon against her freedom. If you're loving this story so far, don't forget to smash that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story. The judge's gavel hit the block, the final, dreadful sound echoing Dahlia Vance's words. Kay was free on an exorbitant bail, but the price of that freedom was having her character publicly shredded. Zayden Cross pulled her into a back corridor, his face grim. "This is worse than the arrest, Kay. This creates doubt. We need to counter this broken promise narrative, and fast." The pain of Dahlia's rejection, a woman Kay had genuinely respected, was a profound wound. It felt worse than the police brutality because it was rooted in a personal, community-based betrayal. As she sat in Zayden's sedan, the exhaustion was physical, but her mind drifted back to the one thing she knew was pure, the origin of Apex Technologies. She wasn't born a billionaire. She'd earned it with blood, sweat, and sheer intellect. She remembered those early years in a cramped, shared apartment, living off ramen noodles, designing the first prototype of her adaptive learning software on a borrowed laptop. She'd worked 20-hour days, fueled by cheap coffee and the memory of the broken-down computers at Lincoln High. That drive wasn't greed. It was the ferocious hunger to prove that intelligence didn't need wealth to thrive. She'd taken every loan, faced every failure, and survived every industry attack. That history, that grind, was the truth Dahlia couldn't see through her bitterness. But the moment of reflection was violently cut short. Zayden's phone buzzed with an alert. He showed Kay the screen, his face hardening. The news scroll showed an aggressive press release from Phoenix Systems, their largest, most vicious competitor. The release didn't mention her arrest directly, but it heavily implied that Apex Technologies' leadership was ethically compromised and distracted by criminal inquiries, suggesting they were a risky partner for any governmental or educational contract. This was the real attack. They weren't just trying to shame her. They were trying to dismantle her empire. It was a calculated corporate assassination, and the final line of their press release, which Zayden read aloud, confirmed the terrifying scale of the plot. Phoenix Systems is ready to step in and offer stable, reliable hardware solutions to the city's school districts, free from scandal. The corporate attack by Phoenix Systems, fueled by the sensational headlines of Kay's arrest, hit like a shockwave, causing Apex Technologies' stock to momentarily dip. The immediate need was damage control, but first, Kay demanded a remote video meeting with Brendan Hale, the vice principal. The screen showed Brendan in his office, looking harassed and stressed, playing the victim perfectly. He claimed he was just following procedure, and the whole situation was a terrible misunderstanding. He kept repeating, "I was just doing my job, Kay. I was worried about an unscheduled visitor," his eyes darting away from the camera. Kay felt a sickening mix of pity and fury at his performance, a feeling far sharper than any corporate crisis. She realized that Brendan wasn't just a traitor, he was a coward. The less extreme event pulled her back to the core of the mystery, Dahlia's broken promise involving her nephew. That nephew was Elias Vance, Kay's ex-love and co-founder of Apex. Elias was the genius hardware engineer, the grounding force to her visionary software. They met in college, two ambitious kids who saw their poverty not as a burden, but as fuel. Their relationship was intense, built on late nights coding, shared pizzas, and a shared dream of changing education. Their split, years later, had been agonizing. Elias wanted to keep the company small, focused on their local community, a pure, nonprofit mission. Kay saw the global potential for impact and profit. When she made the hard choice to take the company public and move its headquarters, Elias saw it as a betrayal of their roots. He stayed behind, refusing her massive buyout offer, heartbroken and resentful. That was the broken promise Dahlia was referring to. Kay had promised Elias a shared, local empire, and she'd chosen a global one instead. The emotional weight of that memory, the genuine love they had lost, was almost paralyzing. The meeting with Brendan ended with Kay hanging up, convinced of his guilt, but lacking proof. She turned to Zayden, her expression hard. "Find out everything about Phoenix Systems' recent hires." Zayden typed rapidly, his fingers flying over the keys, his face remaining impassive until his search yielded a result. He swiveled his laptop screen around, and the blood drained from Kay's face. Prominently listed under the Senior Consultants section for Phoenix Systems, staring back at her with the same intense eyes she remembered, was the name Elias Vance. The sight of Elias Vance's name and professional photo on the website of her corporate enemy was a fresh wave of emotional devastation. It confirmed that the conflict was no longer just about politics or race. It was personal, fueled by years of residual heartbreak and betrayal. Before she could process the full weight of Elias's move, another sharp blow landed. Her estranged husband, Sterling, appeared at her temporary residence, a downtown condo she hadn't visited in months, escorted by a private security guard. Sterling wasn't emotional. He was cold, clinical, and carrying a stack of legal papers. "I'm sorry, Kay," he mumbled, though he didn't look it. "My family can't afford to be associated with this kind of public scandal. It's the divorce papers." The dissolution of her marriage was less of a surprise and more of a final confirmation that her life, as she had built it, was imploding. The less extreme reflection centered on the day they got married 5 years ago. Sterling, a handsome, polished man from an established, conservative banking family, had genuinely adored her drive. They hadn't married for money. They had married for status and companionship, a mutual agreement to be a powerful unit. She remembered the quiet ceremony, the vows that spoke of partnership and mutual respect. The image was painful because she realized she hadn't just lost a husband. She'd lost a life she thought she'd secured, a life that promised stability outside of her hectic tech world. The memory was fleeting. She signed the papers quickly, refusing to engage in any emotional dialogue. After Sterling left, Zayden, who had been reviewing his notes from the day's corporate developments, spoke up. "I found something, Kay." something that connects Sterling's family to Brendan and the school board. He explained that Sterling's mother, Patrice, a high society matriarch, wasn't just wealthy. She was the chair of a massive local teachers' retirement and pension fund. Zayden pointed to a line item. The fund held significant, aggressive investments in municipal school district bonds and property development deals, all orchestrated through the very board Brendan served on. The motive instantly crystallized. If Kay's donation came in, it would force a public audit of the school's technology budget, threatening the bond deals and exposing potential corruption. Brendan and the chief weren't just protecting the school lot. They were protecting Patrice's pension fund and, by extension, Sterling's family's financial stability. The arrest wasn't random. It was orchestrated by the powers that be to protect a web of old money and corruption. The revelation about Patrice's massive pension fund and its vulnerability to a simple donation ignited a righteous fury in Kay. She didn't seek out Sterling. She sought out his mother. She drove to Patrice's immaculate, fortress-like estate in the city's wealthiest suburb, arriving unannounced. The confrontation was immediate and brutal. "You allowed your son to serve me divorce papers because my success was inconvenient, but you're funding the very corruption that tried to destroy my reputation." Kay didn't shout. Her voice was dangerously controlled. Patrice, always the picture of cool disdain, stood her ground, her face tight with anger. "Don't lecture me, Kaylani. This family built this city. You are a flash in the pan. Your little foundation money is unstable. My pension fund is generational. You think I haven't seen you use that black success story as a shield?" The less extreme element of the chapter involved the years of subtle, generational disrespect Kay had endured. Patrice had always treated Kay like a charity case who had gotten lucky. Comments like, "You clean up nicely," or "It's wonderful you found a nice suit," were her subtle tools of subjugation. But now, Kay was untouchable. "Your generation built a system where the schools I went to are falling apart, and you profit from the bonds that keep them underfunded." Kay countered, her logic devastating. "Your money is dirty, and you know it." She pulled out the document Zayden had provided, a simple graph showing the correlation between the bond deals and the technology budget cuts. As Kay laid out the graph, showing exactly how Patrice's wealth was tied to the school district's financial suppression, Patrice's polished composure finally shattered. Her eyes went wide, and her face flushed crimson. She didn't argue. She gasped, clutching the pearl necklace around her neck. She took one step back, knocking over a priceless vase. And then, with a terrifying, silent suddenness, Patrice crumpled to the pristine marble floor, seizing her chest in obvious medical distress. The crash of the expensive vase and Patrice's silent collapse were deafening. Kay stood frozen for a split second, her fury dissolving into pure, panicked instinct. This woman had tried to ruin her, had insulted her family, and had funded the network that orchestrated her arrest, but she was also a human being dying on the floor. Kay dropped to her knees, immediately checking for a pulse and barking orders to a terrified maid to call emergency services. She performed the necessary first aid until the paramedics arrived, her focus absolute. The adrenaline of saving a life replaced the rage of confrontation. This act of unexpected empathy, helping the woman who represented everything she was fighting against, was the less extreme pivot of the chapter. She rode in the ambulance to the hospital, maintaining the pretense of a concerned daughter-in-law. Once Patrice was stabilized in the intensive care unit, the emotional chaos gave way to cold, calculating strategy. While waiting in the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridor, Kay realized this was the opportunity Brendan and the chief hadn't considered. She remembered Patrice complaining about losing a password for a private financial portal and the ridiculously simple recovery question, her childhood pet's name. Using her phone, Kay remotely accessed Patrice's corporate cloud drive, the very place she stored all her complex investment files, including the documents related to the school bonds. She bypassed the security protocols with the same ease she used to debug billion-dollar software. The digital landscape of Patrice's hidden wealth unfolded before her, a dense forest of ledgers and shell companies. She wasn't looking for the bonds anymore. She was looking for the trail of the missing money. Digging deep into transaction logs and opaque investment reports, she found a series of irregular, massive transfers routed through an offshore account, then funneled directly back into a local nonprofit called the Civic Advancement Fund. The nonprofit had a single listed director, Chief Gideon Thorne. Cross-referencing the transfers, Kay found the smoking gun, a dedicated, unaccounted-for pool of city funds, clearly indicating a massive, hidden slush fund controlled by the chief and Brendan, ready for her to expose. If you're still enjoying this story, share this video with someone that needs to watch this video. The spreadsheet glowing on Zayden's huge office monitor was the cold, hard proof Kay needed. The slush fund, the shell nonprofit, and Chief Thorne's signature on the paperwork. "This is it, Kay," Zayden said, leaning back in his chair, his eyes gleaming. "We don't just clear your name. We collapse the whole district power structure. We release this to the state attorney's office, and Thorne goes down, Brendan goes down, the entire school board is dissolved, and those pension bond deals get instantly voided." The revenge felt almost too easy, too swift. But the thought of destroying so many lives, even corrupt ones, left a sour taste in her mouth. She had wanted justice, not a scorched earth campaign. She needed grounding, a reminder of why she started all this. She excused herself from the war room and drove to the Cypress Hill nursing home, a worn-out public facility where her grandfather, Silas, was slowly fading. This was the less extreme part of the day, a moment of necessary quiet. The sight of Silas, frail but still managing a gummy smile, pulled her back to her roots. He was the one who taught her how to tinker with old circuit boards. She held his hand, listening to his soft, familiar breathing, letting the warmth of his presence wash away the digital coldness of the spreadsheets. She spent an hour there, reading him a worn copy of his favorite poetry book. As she was leaving, pausing briefly by the nurse's station to sign out, she saw him. Chief Gideon Thorne was walking down the opposite corridor, his expensive suit looking completely out of place against the pale green walls. He was escorting a small, frail, elderly woman in a wheelchair, his posture unusually softened, his face stripped of its usual hardness. He was just a son, visiting his mother or aunt, human and vulnerable. Their eyes met across the brightly lit hall. For a solid 5 seconds, the two most powerful adversaries in the city simply stared at each other, one hand still warm from her grandfather's touch, the other fresh from handling documents that could send the chief to prison. Thorne's expression went from surprise to a cold, immediate recognition of the threat. The silent confrontation was a warning. The game had just been moved from the courthouse to the personal battlefield. The chief's cold, knowing glare lingered with Kay all the way home. It was the look of a cornered animal, dangerous and unpredictable. She knew, then, that she had to accelerate her plans. This wasn't just a legal fight. Her safety was genuinely at risk. The pressure was intense, but before diving back into the legal strategy with Zayden, she sought out the quiet comfort of her own family. She drove to her mother's small, tidy home in the old neighborhood. Viola Dupree was shelling peas on the porch, a picture of domestic calm. Kay immediately broke down, recounting the arrest, the betrayal by Brendan, the humiliation in court, and finally, the discovery of the slush fund. Viola didn't rush to anger or revenge. Instead, she paused her shelling, wiped her hands on her apron, and simply said, "Daughter, hate only gives them your energy. You build things, you don't break them. Win this the way you won your money, with brilliance and with kindness." That advice, rooted in her mother's simple, powerful morality, served as a moral compass. Kay's mother urged her to find a way to honor her original intent, the children. That conversation was the less extreme ballast the story needed. Later that night, Zayden contacted her. "I've arranged a meeting. Someone wants to talk, but they're scared. They're a school board member, highly disgruntled, and they know the real story behind the tech contract." The meeting was set for a nearly abandoned parking garage downtown. When Kay arrived, a nervous, middle-aged man named Kenneth Piles was waiting, looking over his shoulder constantly. He wasn't involved in the corruption, but he was silenced by it. He didn't offer a confession. He offered something far more valuable, a crucial piece of physical evidence. Kenneth nervously pushed a small, encrypted USB drive into Kay's hand. "This is the original bid proposal. Brendan threw it out, but I salvaged it," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "It proves that Phoenix Systems was offered the contract for double the price, and their tech is 3 years older than yours. Your donation? That would have made the corruption obvious. They needed you gone." He described how Brendan deliberately overrode the principal's approval for Kay's donation. The USB drive contained the full blueprint of the betrayal, confirming Brendan's role as the central puppet master in the conspiracy. The USB drive felt heavy in Kay's palm, the weight of undeniable evidence. She and Zayden immediately returned to his office to analyze its contents. The files laid out the truth with cold precision, an elaborate plan spanning months to award the district's long-term technology contract to Phoenix Systems, effectively funneling millions of taxpayer dollars into the corrupt hands of Brendan, Thorne, and their associates. Kay's $500,000 donation and state-of-the-art computers would have torpedoed the deal by exposing the lower-quality, higher-cost Phoenix bid. It wasn't just a simple arrest. It was a preemptive strike to protect a massive fraud. After securing the data, Kay felt an overwhelming pull back to the school itself. It was the middle of the day, but she drove slowly past the familiar streets, down the block where she and Brendan had played basketball, past the convenience store where she bought her first lottery ticket. This less extreme, quiet drive was her way of reconciling the community she loved with the evil that was infecting it. She saw kids walking home from Lincoln High, their backpacks slung low, laughing. They were why she was fighting. The corruption was systemic, but the solution had to be personal. As she turned onto a quiet residential street a few blocks from her mother's house, she heard it, the terrifying squeal of tires right behind her. A heavy, dark SUV, unmarked and moving far too fast, suddenly swerved out from behind a parked van. It accelerated, coming up dangerously close to her passenger side door, forcing her Maybach toward the curb. She slammed on the brakes, the seatbelt biting into her chest. The SUV didn't stop. Instead, it deliberately clipped her rear bumper, a hard, jolting hit that sent her car spinning. She fought the steering wheel, adrenaline flooding her system, barely managing to keep the Maybach from crashing into a telephone pole. The unmarked SUV sped away, disappearing around the corner before she could even get a clear look at the driver. It was a message, brutal and clear. The people she was fighting knew what she had, and they were willing to turn the conflict fatal. The sharp, dizzying shock of the near-fatal crash left Kay gripping the steering wheel, her breath ragged. She sat there for a minute, the engine idling, watching the dent in her rear bumper and the skid marks her tires had left on the pavement. This was no longer about character assassination. This was a war for her life. Zayden was furious, arriving quickly with a private security team. "This is attempted murder, Kay. We call the FBI. We need to go scorched earth." His voice was tight with protective fury. He urged her to use the evidence to destroy them. Expose every secret, dismantle every life, and leave the conspirators publicly destitute. It was the logical, satisfying path of revenge. The less extreme, yet profoundly emotional, moment was when Kay refused. She leaned her head back against the seat, the wisdom of her mother's words ringing in her ears. "You build things, you don't break them." She thought of Brendan, her old friend, now a terrified pawn in Thorne's game. she thought of Dahlia Vance, misled by her own grief and resentment. She thought of the chief's frail relative in the nursing home. If she used the slush fund evidence for pure destruction, the ensuing chaos would bankrupt the city and completely halt the school district's operations, hurting the very students she came to save. That was not her legacy. She looked at Zayden, her eyes clear and resolute. We aren't calling the FBI. Not yet. We don't need revenge. We need redemption. This fight isn't about crushing them. It's about saving the school. She realized that true power wasn't in wealth or revenge, but in choosing a higher path. Her ultimate goal shifted from simply clearing her name to forcing justice, while still delivering the kindness she had originally intended. She committed to a path of radical empathy, knowing that her greatest weapon against their hatred would be her own extraordinary generosity. The decision to choose redemption over revenge gave Kay a new, clear focus. Her first deliberate, redemptive action was toward Dahlia Vance, the woman who had hurt her most deeply in public. Instead of suing her for slander, Kay wrote a long, heartfelt letter delivered by Zayden. The letter was not defensive. It explained the complex story of Elias and her need to go global, accepting her partial fault in breaking the co-founder's original dream. She detailed Brendan's betrayal, Chief Thorne's corruption, and the reason she was arrested, to stop the Phoenix Systems contract. She ended the letter with a genuine expression of forgiveness, telling Dahlia she still loved her like a favorite aunt. This act of grace was the extreme emotional turn. Later that evening, she needed to see the school one last time, unburdened by her Maybach or police cars. She drove a nondescript sedan to the back of Lincoln High. The less extreme scene was observing the darkness and quiet solitude of the school. She walked up to the side entrance and peered through the window of the old computer lab. The desks were dusty, the monitors bulky and flickering, a stark symbol of the neglect the community had suffered. It solidified her resolve. The computers were coming, no matter what. As she turned to leave, she noticed a small, unmarked brown box tucked under the wiper blade of her sedan. Her security instincts immediately flared, but curiosity won. She opened the box. Inside was a generic USB stick and a note written in rushed, shaky handwriting. He confessed. "I saw the video. Use this to save the school." Her heart hammered against her ribs. She sped back to Zayden's office. Plugging in the drive, the screen lit up with a shaky cell phone video. A panicked, sweating Brendan Hale talking to an unseen person, clearly distraught, detailing how Chief Thorne forced him to call on the arrest and how the Phoenix contract was his only way to pay off a massive gambling debt. This was the final piece, the unedited, irrefutable confession. But the question remained: who took the video, and who risked everything to send it? If you're loving this story so far, smash that like button and let us know with a fire emoji in the comments. The quality of the video, shaky, dimly lit, and filled with Brendan Hale's desperate, sniffling voice, was terrifyingly real. Zayden Cross immediately went to work, authenticating the file, his fingers flying across his keyboard to verify the metadata and the digital timestamps. The speed with which he confirmed its authenticity only highlighted the sheer desperation of the person who had sent it. This confession was everything they needed to tear down Thorne and the corrupt board. This moment of professional focus was the extreme hook. With the evidence secured, Kay needed a clean break from the old conflicts. She drove back to the hospital, not out of obligation, but out of a need to finish what she started with Patrice. She found her mother-in-law sitting up, lucid but frail. "Kehlani, I apologize," Patrice whispered, her voice stripped of its old, haughty edge. "I was a fool. I let my fear of losing control blind me to what you were trying to do. And the disrespect, it was projection. This honest, quiet apology was the less extreme moment of grace, a genuine emotional reconciliation that felt more healing than any legal victory." Kay accepted the apology, realizing Patrice was just another victim of the system she helped create. But the peace was shattered moments after she left the hospital. Zayden called, his tone professional but excited. I ran a deep trace on the anonymous transfer protocol, K. It wasn't completely untraceable. I found the IP address it originated from. It's a server farm in a neighboring state, but the payment for the secure transfer, it came from a verified private account. Kay held her breath, already feeling the sharp, familiar ache in her chest. Whose account, Zayden? She finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. There was a pause on the line, heavy with shared realization. It's Elias Vance, Zayden confirmed. He sent the video. The man who betrayed your business, just saved your life and your mission. This was his penance. The knowledge that Elias Vance, her former co-founder and ex-love, had risked his own freedom and career with Phoenix Systems to send the video confession solidified Kay's determination. His desperate act of conscience was the final confirmation that her path of redemption was the right one. She wouldn't just hand the evidence over to the DA. She would use it to force a public reckoning. The most explosive stage for this was the scheduled emergency school board meeting that evening. The stakes were impossibly high. Zayden tried to talk her out of it. It's too risky. Give me the drive, and I'll leak it safely. But Kay refused. They tried to arrest me publicly. They tried to kill me privately. I want them to face their shame publicly. Her entrance into the packed Lincoln High auditorium was the ultimate expression of this decision, an extreme demonstration of power. She walked in dressed simply, without the Maybach, escorted only by Zayden and 2 discreet security personnel. The room was thick with tension and hostility. Brendan Hale sat at the board table, his face sickly green, his eyes darting frantically. The less extreme phase of the chapter was the sheer, suffocating arrogance of the board. They opened the meeting by voting unanimously to formally reject any unscheduled private donations, clearly a move to legally block Kay's offer even if she were cleared. The crowd grumbled, but the board ignored them, smug in their authority. Brendan even offered a weak, prepared statement about fiscal responsibility that made Kay sick to her stomach. She knew she had to strike now. As the board prepared to move on to the Phoenix Systems contract, Kay stood up from her seat in the back row. Her voice, amplified by the natural acoustics of the auditorium, cut through the noise. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I believe there's an unscheduled presentation that relates directly to the integrity of this board. She walked purposefully down the center aisle, Zayden just behind her, holding the small USB drive. She reached the podium and, ignoring the chairman's sputtering protest, calmly inserted the drive into the projector's laptop. The image of a frantic, tearful Brendan Hale suddenly filled the massive screen behind the board, his voice booming over the speakers. Thorne told me. He said if I didn't set her up, he'd expose my debt. The Phoenix deal is double the price. It's all a fraud. The auditorium erupted into instant, deafening chaos. The sight of his own face confessing on the enormous screen was an immediate, crushing execution of Brendan's career and reputation. The extreme scene was his reaction. He screamed, lunging for the projector, attempting to smash the laptop and stop the video. Security quickly intervened, pulling him back as the entire auditorium, parents, teachers, and media, rose to their feet, shouting in stunned outrage. The chairman was banging his gavel uselessly. The board members were shouting over one another. It was a complete, glorious breakdown of the corrupt system. In the midst of the chaos, Kay calmly waited for the scene to play out. Then, the less extreme moment began, a quiet movement at the edge of the auditorium. Chief Gideon Thorne, who had been sitting quietly in the back corner observing the meeting, realized the gravity of the situation. His face was a mask of defeat, the cold composure from the precinct finally gone. He didn't make a sound. He simply stood up and, without looking at anyone, slipped out a side door, followed quickly by 2 of the most implicated board members. Their quiet, furtive exit spoke volumes. The system was hemorrhaging power, and they knew they were finished. When the room finally settled into a horrified silence, broken only by the sound of Brendan being led away, Kay stepped back to the podium. She didn't gloat. She didn't accuse. She spoke only of the students. Then, a figure rose from the front row. It was Dahlia Vance. The retired teacher walked slowly toward the podium, her steps heavy. Kay braced herself, expecting another angry outburst, but Dahlia was weeping openly. She reached the podium and didn't look at the board or the cameras. She looked only at Kay. I was wrong, Kelani, Dahlia sobbed, her voice cracking with raw emotion. I let my nephew's grief poison me. You never broke your heart, only his. You came back to save us, and I betrayed you. She reached out, bypassing the microphone, and wrapped Kay in a tight, shaking embrace. In front of the entire community and the world's media, the ultimate public betrayal was undone by the deepest, most authentic act of public healing and forgiveness. The image of the powerful billionaire CEO locked in a tearful embrace with the humble, retired teacher went instantly viral, shattering the entitled queen narrative forever. The roar of applause and cheers from the community was deafening, the validation Kay had quietly craved all along. This was the extreme emotional high point. With the corruption exposed and the public firmly on her side, Kay's path was clear. She addressed the crowd again, her voice clear and strong. She didn't just re-announce her original plan. She went bigger. The conspiracy to keep our schools poor ends today. The 200 new computers and the $500,000 scholarship fund, that was yesterday's offer. She paused, letting the suspense hang heavy in the air. The new offer is this: $/math $350 computers, fully staffed and managed by Apex Technologies for 5 years, and the scholarship fund is now $/math $$1 This is for the students who deserve better than the corruption that betrayed them. The crowd erupted again, thrilled by the victory and the massive influx of resources. The less extreme, yet profoundly meaningful, moment was the realization that the corrupt board had lost everything, not just their power, but the community's trust. The final, unprecedented announcement was saved for the end. Kay spoke about the officers who had arrested her, Throckmorton and Klein, confirming their actions were directed by the chief. She acknowledged the reality of systemic issues, but also the good people working within broken systems. My life was put in danger by the power of the corrupt few, but not every public servant is corrupt, she stated, her words piercing the noise. In recognition of those who upheld their oath, I am establishing a new, permanent endowment to provide educational and housing support for the families of the police officers and city workers who stood for integrity and refused to join this ring. It was the ultimate act of radical empathy, creating a fund dedicated to separating the good from the bad, guaranteeing that her legacy would be defined by kindness, not revenge. The days that followed were a blur of national media attention, criminal indictments for Thorne and Brendan, and the glorious, swift installation of a new technology at Lincoln High. The contrast was palpable: justice served through the courts, and salvation delivered through pure generosity. This was the new legacy, the final extreme hook. A few weeks later, Kay stood in the new, gleaming Apex computer lab, watching students log into brand new machines. The room hummed with possibility. A boy, no older than 9, looked up at her, his eyes wide with wonder, and whispered, "Thank you." This quiet, sincere moment was the less extreme, deeply satisfying closure she needed. Her name was cleared, her company was thriving, and her community was changed. She had won the war without becoming a monster. But one last piece of business remained: the divorce from Sterling. She finalized the papers, signing away millions, but she didn't stop there. She didn't seek to bankrupt him. That was too simple. Her true, final twist was far more poetic. She issued a final public statement to the media, declaring the divorce final and adding one explosive detail. "I am not pursuing punitive damages," the statement read. "Instead, I am establishing the Sterling Legacy Foundation with a permanent $$100 million endowment. The only condition of this endowment is that Sterling must run it full-time, dedicated exclusively to community development and infrastructure projects in the city." Her true revenge was complete. She didn't just take his money or his time. She forced the man who sought to exploit her community to spend the rest of his life working to make it better, a perpetual penance funded by her success. Her final, quiet reflection settled on the quiet power of goodness. She took the biggest, most aggressive attack on her character and used it as the foundation for an undeniable act of grace that fixed the community and redefined her enemies. Kehlani Dupree's story shows us that true power isn't about the money you acquire, but the empathy you choose to lead with, especially when the world is expecting you to fight dirty. If you love the twist in Kay's story, hit that like button. Tell us in the comments. If you were Kay, would you have chosen revenge or redemption? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that reveal the secrets behind the headlines.